Sandro asks, "When I sent you my penis, why did you leave me on read?" Well, the answer is, Sandro, is that I was not impressed with your performance. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of the Tengridome. I'm your host, Iggy. And seeing as nothing of note really happened last week, and the upcoming event is going to be covered extensively by Danny and Sriram on the Analysis podcast, I figured why not make a little bit of a Q&A session episode this week, so that my audience may get to know me better and vice versa, and I'd answer various direct questions our listeners may have concerning combat sports, current sport news and their applications, etc., etc. I was also pretty open to suggestions as to which topics our listeners would like me to cover in the form of either a bonus podcast or a normal of week one when nothing of note is really happening. And there were some questions that warrant their own episode, but I would cover the questions. I would cover those questions briefly so that you might get a better idea of what I'm going to be talking about going forward. The questions were posted in our Discord, which you can join for as little as $5 per month on our Patreon. And if you have any questions regarding fighting or culture of fighting or fighting news, or anything combat sports related really, consider joining our Patreon. Last week, our video analyst Gillian Lung covered the Crazy Bee gym and their fighting style in detail, which was a direct Patreon request from our esteemed Patreon and big friend of the site, AB, which you may check out as soon as you join our Patreon for as little as $3 per month, which grants you access to all of the Patreon content we've been putting out during the course of during the time our site has been active. You can learn the full extent of Patreon benefits by checking out our Patreon at patreon.com/fightside. But if you want to ask a smaller question that you feel doesn't warrant an entire Q&A episode, then feel free to post them in the comment section on YouTube. I am planning on adding a Q&A section at the end of most episodes I'm going to publish going forward. But regardless, our patrons were very enthusiastic in posting posting their questions, and some of them had a sort of an overlap between them, and many of them were very interesting. So if you think that this episode won't concern you or catch your attention in any way, shape or form, then bear with me, please. There were some quite good ones. The first question was the first question was the first question was the penis question, which I've answered, which I hope fairly informative enough. But in order not to offend Sandra's sensibilities, I'm going to actually give a bit of a more extended answer. So yeah, Sandra, that was a really nice cock, bro. That it was a little bit on the small side, but the shape is overall pretty symmetrical, and your balls have just the right amount of hair. So my verdict is a light to a decent 7. Hope that satisfies you, mate. But in all seriousness, the first question was the greatest Mongolian fighter, in my opinion, and why is Mongolian throat singing so cool? And there was a bit of a tie-in question from another patron of ours. He asked me whether I follow any sumo, and he knows that most rikishi are Mongolian. I suppose the fact that I am actually Mongolian is a very... I seem very exotic to my listeners in that respect, which is pretty endearing, I suppose. And there was a question about Mongolian wrestling, so I suppose it's a bit of a I suppose it's a bit of a topic in itself, which I'm going to answer in detail a bit later. Let's examine the somewhat less complex ones for the time being, because examining all this stuff requires a bit of a deep dive. It's an entire culture. This one isn't really from a patron, but rather from a staff member, fellow staff member, Matt, who asked me, how effective will specialists be in the next 5 years in MMA, and what adaptations would you advise as a specialist to make to maintain their relevancy? God damn it. I mean, this one also warrants an entire episode in itself. I mean, this is such an extensive topic to cover. I mean, when you think about it, it concerns divisional meta, concerns MMA fundamentals, concerns good strategizing, game planning, all that nitty-gritty nuts and bolts stuff. Which techniques are you going to pick? Well, thank God that I have actually written an entire article covering MMA fundamentals, which you can check out on our website. It's called the UFC's Meatpacking Plan Part 3, Gotta Take One to Take One, which is a reference to Dominic Cruz's annoying tendency to prattle on and on about how a true fighter must take one in order to land one. Because this is something that takes real guts from a fighter, and funnily enough, the person that generally takes one to land one doesn't actually land one. So it's the name should be obvious from my explanation. It should become obvious from my explanation, rather. Well, yeah, my point is that every fighter must have a solid grasp on fundamentals, and by fundamentals I mean ringcraft and footwork, strictly speaking. Those two are the most essential ones. And a fighter must be able to answer the questions of where does he want the fight to go, why he wants the fight to go there, and through which means, that is, how he's going to accomplish this feat. And I've talked about, for example, early career Justin Gaethje, who was a pressure fighter, and I hope he still remains a pressure fighter. He still has that skill set that he can fall back on in case his distance-based counterpunching doesn't work out, which is surely going to come in handy against Khabib, but that's, neither here nor there, and a topic in itself. But yeah, the point is that where does Justin want the fight to go? He wants to pressure his guy to the fence. Why? Because he has a shitty eyesight, and an opponent that's moving backwards is much less offensively potent, which is great for him, because he wants to stay within striking range where he can either feel the strikes coming with his guard, or try to see them coming. And it cuts the time you need in order to make... Well, that's the thing with pressure fighters. If you're pressuring, it cuts the time you need to make your reads in half, because you're the one making stuff happen. Your opponent has to answer you with offense if he doesn't want to get smashed. The question of how is that, if you're Justin Gaethje, you're going to use the threat of your massive hitting power and your cage-cutting footwork to cut off escape routes and blast leg kicks to limit your opponent's mobility. And then you use the threat of your hitting power to actually hit him lots. What relevancy does this have for specialists? Well, Justin Gaethje is a specialist, essentially. He's basically a pure striker in MMA. So using him as an example, and maybe, if you have a solid grasp on your fundamentals, it eliminates the need for you to become basically good at everything, because fundamentals are not an assortment of techniques. It's a bit more of a conceptual thing. On whatever tools you use in order to accomplish those, to implement those conceptual things in practice, depends on your attributes, aptitudes, and your build, all sorts of parameters. So the real answer is, I suppose, is that specialists will always remain relevant. Because you can't really become good at everything unless you're truly a special individual. So every fighter, in a sense, is going to remain a specialist. And seeing as how successful specialist champions are, it's almost preferable to be a specialist rather than be, a sort of a jack of all trades, all rounder. Because you sort of see them like, if you look at lightweight in its current state, it's sort of mediocre all rounders are dime a dozen in that division. And I don't see any of them really moving forward in any meaningful respect, moving up the rankings in any meaningful respect. So, on using the example of those champions that that exploit the divisional meta and the general tendencies that fighters in their divisions exhibit. Say, for example, someone like Max Holloway, who was essentially geared to exploit Jose Aldo's anti-wrestling game, exploit his anti-wrestling and counterpunching game. Now, someone like Khabib, who exploits the overall MMA meta of using defense as a form of wrestling defense, takedown defense, as a means of getting off the ground with the wall walk, by turning the wall walk into an attacking position for him, the answer becomes pretty clear. You must know your sense of direction, in which direction you want the fight to go, and you must understand your divisional meta to such an extent that would allow you to pick the specific tools you're going to need in order to stay relevant. Because really, oftentimes, fighters usually have the most successful fighters do not have a very extensive arsenal of weapons. They have depth, and depth is a concept that Danny Martin explored in extensive detail in his post-fight breakdown of Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa. And depth in this case is just using a set number of tools that play off each other in complementary ways. That would allow an arsenal of tools that would allow you to play them off each other and not just throw shit at a wall. I suppose this is a bit of a milquetoast answer because there are not a lot of concrete things I might suggest. Outside of staying mindful of the divisional meta, and always staying mindful of the tools that you're drilling and picking, and conversely, exploiting the divisional meta too much would lead you to a situation where you're so geared towards that particular meta that whenever someone comes in with a game plan to exploit your style, you might get caught off guard. Which sort of ties back to the Gage versus Khabib fight, because Khabib exploits the divisional meta so much, it essentially gives Gage the most solid path to victory out of all lightweight contenders, because he doesn't really use defense as a means of defending takedowns. Most of his work is done in the open space. Rather. And yeah, this question really warrants an entire episode. This is becoming sort of a theme with all these questions. I may really need to sit down and think about it. It may warrant not really an episode, but an entire article, But yeah, the answer for now is that even if you are a specialist, study your fundamentals, and pick your style, gear it towards the skill set and attributes that you already have, and just keep increasing your depth and your efficacy with those tools that you already have. And whenever you hit a ceiling, take a step back and reevaluate whatever tools that you're using and what plays off it, what plays off each other, what thing plays off the other thing, and in what way, and what are the implications of you using that tool. Like, for example, uh, a style geared that revolves around using the threat of say, a single leg. Many fighters know how to limp leg out of single legs now, so the natural progression for that would be to chain wrestle and to progress into a double, or to build off your opponent's tendency to limp leg out to follow up with some form of strike. And if your opponent keeps using the wall walk in order to defend, in order to get off the bottom, then exploit that. And if the divisional meta is moving away from the wall walk back to the open space, then that just brings you back to square one, you know? I suppose I'm operating with a bit of a broader definition of specialist in this respect, because I think when it comes to specialist, there's you're not really going to see like pure. I mean, we already don't we already sort of don't see. We're already moving away from specialist in terms of being a pure wrestler or a pure grappler. I mean, my colleagues may debate me on this, but I think with the growing understanding of MMA fundamentals, we're moving towards an era where we're going to see a more, I suppose, traditional sort of division between styles in terms of being whether you're a pressure fighter, whether you're a counter fighter, etc., etc. And so we're going to see specialists in that mold, where they're using their knowledge of fundamentals to gear their style towards a broader, more conceptual, towards broader concept that they're going to implement with a more cohesive game. But there are certainly caveats to this, as it is always the case with fighting. I mean, like, there's always cases where a fighter comes in with a weird sort of guard or weird sort of ability to chain together attacks, like going from, for example, let's say high kicks into takedowns, or let's go for a really weird combination, like say low kicks from up close into snap downs, and that's going to shake up, and that's going the efficacy of this tool is always going to give you a certain edge where not many people actually know how to deal with it. So, like, this is another way you can go about staying relevant as a specialist in your division. Just be weird. But yeah, I think this warrants further examination. So, let's move on. What's something that would greatly improve the heavyweight meta? This is a question from our Discord patron with the nickname of Spent Sir. And it's immediately followed up with a reply from another Discord patron by the nickname of Sigman. Combine heavyweight and light heavyweight. Well, you know, I'm not so sure about that one. Really, the heavyweight meta is just, it's kind of, can you even describe it as a meta? Because when you think about it, it's just, the real answer to all problems at heavyweight is just be durable and have enormous punching power, which most of these heavyweights actually really do have. And maybe know slightly more than just how to throw right hands, you know. This is something that I've argued on my previous Twitter account that got nuked with Conor Rebush of Heavy Hands. And Rebush pointed out that, well, in fact, Rebush recorded an entire bonus episode in the wake of our discussion that essentially stated all the things that I've already said, but using twice as many words. So, Conor Rebush, if you're listening to this, you're my sitcom arch nemesis. If we meet on the field of battle, I'm going to seek you out. Well, yeah, the thing with heavyweight is that it's been covered extensively elsewhere in the podcasts, in Jack Slack's podcast and Heavy Hands and whatever other shows that are dedicated to fight analysis. But the thing with heavyweights is just that there's not enough money in fighting. Most athletic, really gifted heavyweights move towards other more financially and otherwise rewarding sports, such as basketball, football. By football, I mean American football, rugby, whatever. Anything but fighting. And most of the heavyweights that are currently in MMA are just big dumb lads that came across a person and that person just went, fucking hell, you're a big lad. You must be good at fighting. You must be handy in a scrap. Just why not try out MMA or boxing or whatever? The real outlier here is men's heavyweight wrestling, where they actually really are good. But wrestling is an outlier compared to MMA in a lot of respects, and compared to boxing. When if you look, for example, at women's wrestling, they actually are world class, and it's not just the commentators being nauseatingly patronizing, putting on a fake smile and talking about how high level they are or how accomplished they are. Like whenever Holly Holm is on her 50th lap around the cage, while Michelle Waterson is busy fighting air, trying to reconnect with her past lives and relearn the art of air bending, or showing us how to properly maintain social distancing. And like, most of the better heavyweights are very athletic in their own right. I'm not saying that most of them are just fat sacks of shit that can't move faster than faster than that McDonald's chick from that viral video that kicked some guy's ass by throwing him around the entire restaurant rather. And the problem with that is that, well, seeing as bigger people are not as common as regular-sized people, and in fighting the margin is even smaller, you get situations where like a giant heavyweight just has no one to train with, no one to spar against, and as such their technical efficacy suffers. Which brings us to the stupid argument of well, one shot can end it all, and as such heavyweights are just. And that's why heavyweights are just so shit at defending themselves, which makes no sense. Yeah, this guy may kill me with one shot. Better have no defense and just swing right hands at him. And it ties back to the problem with MMA overall, is just the lack of internalization of MMA fundamentals or fighting fundamentals across all camps. Heavyweights are essentially just the most egregious case in that respect, where they're just thrown into the cage and just told to just be yourself, baby. And that's the case with most MMA fights. It's just, I'm trying to be the best me. I'm not game planning against a particular opponent, and that's why Stipe Miocic turned out to be so successful. Is that he always comes up with something that will help him against a specific opponent. Be it, say, JDS or Overeem or Ngannou or DC, he always has something in store here. He at least puts the minimum effort into thinking about what is going to be effective against his opponent. It's not always the best tool. It's not even the right idea, but at least he thinks about it. So the easiest way to improve heavyweight meta is to just, have coaches think, and kind of be really strict with their pupils, with their heavyweight pupils in particular, to just hammer home the point about that you kind of have to use your brain a little every once in a while. Which is It sounds easy on paper, but when you think at how dumb your average MMA fighter is, and how dumb your average heavyweight fighter, and when you realize that your heavyweight fighter is on average twice as dumb as your normal MMA fighter, then it becomes a bit of a tall task. Yeah, I suppose that's my answer. That kind of sort of ties back to the previous question. Where you just think about fighting. Think about what you're doing. And MMA coaches just don't do that, and it's just drives me up the wall. This whole situation. Miguel asks, maybe you could talk a bit about ACA. You probably have some unique insights into the organization. Well, most of the stuff about ACA is kind of self-evident. I mean, it's also another topic that warrants a separate examination. But I suppose the TLDR is that it's an organization run by a dictator, with all that entails. I'm not going to have some form of unique insight simply because I understand Russian and I speak Russian. Of course, there are caveats to this, because I have some cultural insights that outside observers may not have. And this was a question that Miguel quickly followed up with. I am also curious to learn more about combat sports in the Caucasus. Why they produce so many high-level talents across multiple combat sports, the different ethnic groups and their relationships to each other, and how those relationships, as well as the influence of the political environment, could have an influence on combat sports moving forward. Fucking hell, Miguel. I mean, to be fair, I did point out in the beginning of the topic that I am open to suggestions about the episodes, so I suppose this is him giving me suggestions. So, not a knock on Miguel. I'm very grateful, actually, for your input, for your interest, and improving this show. And I'm definitely going to examine this topic in great detail. But a quick answer would be is just the geopolitical situation in the Caucasus, and its history, and its cultural aspects. In that it's a region that was always resisting subjugation by Russia, and as such, historically, it's cultivated, I suppose, a bit of a warrior culture. So naturally, combat sports would be something that many men in that region would gravitate towards, and something that people respect in general. As to why they produce so many high-level talents, is that just basically just the economical situation. I mean, combat sports are a form of social, one of the more efficient forms of social mobility in the world in general. And the Russian government provides many perks and provides support for combat sports athletes across the country. Like, for example, high-level wrestlers frequently receive apartments. They receive benefits at universities. They win cars. They win property, essentially. So it's a rewarding activity, and it's preferable to just living... Not to sound presumptuous, but it's certainly preferable than living in the village in bumfuck nowhere doing nothing. Which is something that I am doing right now. If you didn't know, to those of my listeners that didn't know, I actually live in a village in Siberia, in the middle of nowhere, and I have nothing. The only if I didn't live during the internet age, I wouldn't be able to do this. I wouldn't be able to communicate with you and improve my knowledge to such an extent that I would be able to, make this show. But that's a TLDR. And it's kind of really all these situations, all these things that relate to an unusual amount of, say, demographic that is very good at an activity, any form of activity, just has to do with history and culture and your geographical location in many respects. I mean, it's just common sense, basically. But yeah, definitely going to examine that one in more exhaustive detail, because it deserves it. It's also a question that incidentally ties back to the very first question that I presented in the beginning of the podcast that concerns my culture, that is Mongolian culture. So it's very fun. It's very, very, very cool that warms my heart. It warms my heart that people are interested in learning all this stuff. This is how combat sports should be, you know. This is the sports is a very effective mechanism of connecting cultures and making people interested in different cultures. There are, of course, caveats to this, because it may lead some less learned people to jump to conclusions and just boil everything down to bro science. It's just, oh yeah, this... well, I did say that certain regions have a warrior culture ingrained in them. It has many asterisks above each word that I've said. It's because when you really think about it, there isn't such a thing as a warrior culture, because warrior culture is just, in the way that they're frequently portrayed in media and literature, they wouldn't function at all. They're non-functional. It's just it's a sentiment, it's an idea. And many people, like, for example, people like someone like, let's say, Brandon Schaub or Joe Rogan, just jump to conclusions and boil everything down. Oh, it's just a hard land. Boosts testosterone, you know. Dagestanis actually don't bend over when they pick up stuff. They squat, and squats increase testosterone levels, and that's why they're all so hardy and hairy and and that's why Mongolians have beards, while other Asians suffer from a lack of facial hair. They actually lift lots of hairy stuff. What the fuck am I talking about? I don't actually believe in all this crap. Just a disclaimer. But yeah, what I was going for is that just you have to be careful when you're examining other people's history, because it's a very nuanced thing to study. There's lots of nuance. Everything has some sort of a caveat. Everything has some sort of a weird background thing that ties back to the other background thing, and it's just a giant mess of interconnected webs of intrigue, molding an entire people's culture. It's very difficult, is what I'm trying to say, and it's to go off topic a little bit. Recently, I've been thinking about that. I saw a post about a game called Pathologic, which is not related to combat sports in any way, shape, or form, save for the topic of cultures that I've been talking about, rambling about for the past 10 minutes, and it blatantly uses the Buryat culture, my culture, as a form of world building, with all the serial numbers filed off. It's a game that's been given an enormous publicity boost recently due to reviews from people like H-Bomber Guy and Lord Mandalore. The reviews are excellent, by the way, not a knock on them, and the game itself is very interesting. It's a game that is close to many people's hearts. It explores very interesting concepts, and it's a very artsy sort of game with a very deep narrative. But I have a massive bone to pick with this game, because basically just it takes my language, an existing language that is, it's a language that is dying, but it's a language that actual people speak. It's still in use in some regions. It's just called steppe language. It's not and it's not something that, to my knowledge, it's not something that the developers team alluded to. It's not something that's been publicized very broadly. It's not because the entire Discord service is dedicated to people deciphering, quote unquote, that language. Most of them foreigners, most of them Americans, and otherwise. A lot of them are Russians. and none of them point out that this is actually an existing language. Well, some of them do, but none of them really explore the implications of that. And the developers didn't hire, to my knowledge, they didn't hire actual actors, actual Burят-speaking actors to vocalize those lines and consult them on the language, and to consult with the locals on their use of the language and the culture. Some people would disagree with me. Some people would say, "Oh, all forms of representations are great, even if it's in this form." But like the Buret people stand-ins in that game are either inhuman worms, inhuman mutant worms, same face one man that just looks like just an army of clones of that look the same, and the model for a woman is just is just a lady in rags that wears nothing, wears essentially just rags, tone up rags, and I mean, I understand having technical constraints where you can't actually to make distinct models for every NPC, but worms, anthropomorphic worms, not very nice. The game does make important points about the history of mistreatment of indigenous Asians in Russia, which is something that the person who made that post pointed out, which I appreciate. But like, it could have been handled a lot better. Like, some of the roles in development could have been taken by actual Buryats, like I've said. You could at least hire consultants. And if you point this out, if I made this observation in Russian, I'd get dogpiled by frothing at the mouth fanboys denying that the game is even about the Buryat people. Especially since the game received such a publicity boost from Mandalore, which makes criticizing the game essentially sacrilege, because it looks like me knocking down an underdog developer, because it's a perfect storm. The game's creation is sort of a perfect storm, like compounding factors that exacerbate the situation where you can't actually criticize it, because it's a smaller game, small developer, unique aesthetic, equals underdog, must be protected at all costs. But yeah, the developers essentially attempted to file as many serial numbers as they could of the steppe culture, correctly assuming that most of the Russian players won't pay close attention, and most Westerners doubly so. And trying to bring attention to it now would just get you labeled a weird slacktivist, trying to knock an underdog developer down for seeking inspiration from a unique source, and said unique source being my own people, whose culture is currently being systematically eradicated by the Russian government, and the Chinese government in Inner Mongolia, for that matter. And I mean, Westerners, like H-Bomber guy, for all his interest in equality and all that stuff, didn't really examine the world in depth, and just his take was essentially an orientalistic idea of this that the steppe culture is this fun alien world. It's a weird alien world where weird people live, and because it doesn't know anything about the actual steppe cultures that live in Central and Northern Asia, and didn't bother reading about them. To them, it's not rooted in reality, so it's he didn't. It's to him, it's not a criticism at all. I mean, Westerners still use the word Mongol to insult each other, not realizing that the Mongolian people are still around, So really, while I'm not surprised in the slightest that to them, a nomadic steppe culture is just fun and alien, and it's not something that's at all rooted in reality. Like, if you open the page for steppe language on the Gamepedia page for Pathologic, there's a dictionary, and that dictionary is just basically a word for word English to Buryat dictionary, which I suppose is kind of funny that there actually aren't any extensive English to Buryat dictionaries in the web available in the web, but here you have a dictionary presented in the game. But What irks me in particular is that it just doesn't mention, doesn't. What irks me in particular that neither the fandom nor the developers point towards my culture as a source of inspiration. They just it's a little line under the trivia segment. Oh yeah, and here's some dying culture that lives in eastern Siberia, in northern Asia, that's going to assimilate with Russians and die off so soon. It doesn't matter. I mean, something that keeps happening all the time with the smaller cultures, such as smaller, in giant quotes, of course. Smaller does not mean less relevant to the history of the world or the world at large, such as a culture such as the Maori people, the Polynesians, and like say, for example, for another example, as the indigenous peoples of Canada, etc., etc. Some white boy can straight up rip one of those cultures' creation myth off verbatim and get showered with praise for originality, and no one would bat an eye. Because there's a bit of a cultural bias going on, because those cultures are smaller and thus less relevant. And so, presumably, in the minds of those people, of these people, it gives creators carte blanche to just rip off cultures and credit no one, or just avoid employing indigenous people as at least consultants. Like, the developers could have used their platform because they were interested in exploring the themes of indigenous Asians being oppressed in Russia and how the cultural clash affects the collective consciousness of said peoples, but they didn't actually bother to provide real examples of that happening. They could have easily set the game somewhere in Buryatia and just made it a little bit of a magical realism sort of deal, you know? They could have brought attention to the problems, to the actual real issues that I actually face every day in the world, and they didn't do that. Because they probably thought that it's going to be inconvenient, or it's going to affect sales, or whatever. I mean, for a given value of affecting sales, because it's an indie game, and it's an artsy game, it's at times impenetrable game. So really, if you're at this point, you just shouldn't be worried about alienating a part of your audience, I think. If you dive into such questions, in my opinion, you must go full hog. Oh yeah, how is that relevant to the questions of to the topic of combat sports that I've been examining? Is that you get the same sort of deal in fight promotions and in the way that fans talk about fighters. Right, I'm moving away from the Q&A thing for the time being. I would apologize for this, but this is a very important topic. You know, I was actually very worried about speaking about this, but it's something that's very dear to me. It's a topic that's very deeply, I feel very strongly about, and I was worried about alienating viewers and listeners, and I kind of figured, well, if my listeners are going to take umbrage with me speaking about the topics of preservation of cultures, then do I really want to have listeners such as these? You know? Because overall the fight site's stance, I hope I won't step on at gallows toes here by saying that the fight site promotes equality and is a big proponent of social justice, because sports should be a form of connecting the world. It's top athletes from all across the world competing at the highest level, and it's not supposed to engender bigotry or cultural chauvinism or xenophobia. In fact, it should promote the friendship between various peoples living across the world. It's not always that way in practice, sadly, but it's something that should be... it's a cause worth fighting for, in my opinion. Because, as I've pointed out, sports are one of the only actually working forms of social mobility for minorities or otherwise marginalized groups, or, for example, people who are poor. And the way people sometimes talk about fighters is just, and athletes in general, I think I've pointed this out on one of the bonus episodes. Well, the only bonus episodes I've put out so far is that there is a problem where at some point you start talking about athletes as meat. You just basically dehumanize them. And that's why propping up and talking about the culture from which the fighter originates or athlete originates is very important in order to keep him humanized. Keep them humanized, whether it's a he or she, or I don't know. That's why Miguel's question is so interesting, because and that's why it's worth examining in precise detail, because it shows that people genuinely are interested in learning about why a certain culture produces so many athletes, or what makes athletes from a different region stand apart from other athletes. Like, for example, let's say, to provide a very distinct example is just well, the Cuban school of boxing. It's very distinct, and there are cultural and historical and geopolitical reasons for that. So you have to always keep that thing in mind, you know? Well, since I've... I suppose this brings us back to the question about Mongolian wrestlers and sumo and just Mongolian athletes and fighters in general. And, well, we're already running past the 50-minute mark, so it's something that I'm going to examine in either one of the follow-up episodes or bonus episodes, which hopefully, which is, I think I'm going to, I may even attempt to record one of the an extended answer to one of those questions during this week, or maybe the beginning of the next week. But yeah, for the time being, it's why, yeah, I do follow, well, I'm sorry, I need to get my brain together. I need to concentrate. We veered way off topic, so I apologize for that. Now, the very first question after the Mongolian one was from a Discord patron with the nickname Sigman. And he asked me, do sumo wrestlers count as fighters? Well, the answer is very easy. Yes, they do count as fighters, because the way, I mean, your mileage may vary, but sumo is a contact sport. It's a full contact sport that with incredible depth, and any full contact sport with such depth deserves to be called a combat sport. It deserves to be called a form of fighting. And the follow-up question was, do I follow any sumo? And he knows, do you follow any sumo? I know most of the best Rikishi are now Mongolian. Well, that has to do with once again geopolitical situations in Japan and Mongolia, and cultural backgrounds. Mongolia has a very storied tradition of wrestling called Bokh. In Buret Mongolian it's called Bokheberodon. Explaining the meta and the history of the sport is going to take a very long time, so I'm going to answer that in one of the follow-up episodes, as I've already said. And it's somewhat has to do with the waning popularity of combat sports in Japan. Well, you may argue with this, but in general, I mean, as a society, Japan is more geared towards scholastic and financial success through education and various other smarty pants ways of making money rather than, fighting or wrestling. Many of the most accomplished rikishi, such as, for example, Asashoryu or Hakuho, have had an extensive, either an extensive training or an extensive background in national Mongolian wrestling, which it's essentially a national pastime. Everyone wrestled at some point or another in Mongolia. It's just something that people do, and good wrestlers are greatly respected in Mongolian society. That's why an enormous amount of the male population had wrestled at some point in their lives at various levels. And when you get such a fertile ground for athletes to compete in, with it being encouraged by the culture itself, of course you're going to get some extraordinary athletes. And as to the question of whether I follow any sumo, I would sometimes sit down and watch a basho, but it's not something that it's not a sport that I followed very extensively, which is something that I may wish to rectify in the future because it's very fun and reasonably easy to follow as long as you familiarize yourself with the terminology, which is not that hard. Yod asks, why is Mongolian throat singing so cool? I mean, it warms my heart that people on the Discord were so interested in learning more about my people. I mean, the answer should be self-evident because you make weird sounds when you throat sing, and it sounds cool. That's why it's cool. But I suppose there is a historical reason for that, because it's the theory goes that herders would imitate the sounds that various animals would make in order to facilitate herding animals. And then it sort of snowballed from there into various techniques, schools of singing, and things like that. All right, last one for today, and I'm going to wrap this up. I want to know why the fuck most MMA fans, fighters, coaches, commentators, etc. are terrible analysts and don't understand the technical side of the sport. Oh, for fuck's sake. Not going easy on me, are ya? It's... The theme of this episode was questions that warrant an entire episode or an article. And and thinking about these questions actually gave me a headache. They're all very deep and all require very extensive answers. Let's settle for the time being by saying that most MMA fans, fighters, coaches, commentators, etc. are dumb as fuck. Because people in general are dumb as fuck. I hope this is a satisfying answer for now. Wow. Yeah, this was a fun one. I mean, I would say that I should do this more often, but this single session gave me enough material to last me a month, maybe more. I mean, this one was mostly a Patreon-centric episode, obviously, but I'd wager that this was an enjoyable enough listen for my other listeners that are otherwise not in the Discord. I hope this made you at least consider joining joining our Patreon. You get to meet, acquaint yourself with, and converse with people who do not ask easy questions and are always down for an intelligent, in-depth discussion about very interesting topics. So this one really made me appreciate our community that much more. So a giant round of thanks to all of you. Yeah, regretfully, I was not able to answer all questions, or indeed answer. At least I feel like I haven't been able to answer the questions to an extent that I would be satisfied with the answer. But I hope this was fun enough, and I do want to explore a lot of them in depth in the follow-up episodes. I'm currently thinking about whether to make a sort of a Q&A part 2 for this session in particular, or to make different separate episodes covering each topic separately. I'm going to think about that. Yeah, all thanks goes to our patrons, and of course, all thanks goes to our sponsors such as Bavada, where you can get at $150 signing bonus. Please bet responsibly. Check out Hyperfly for all your grappling needs and various other combat sports needs, and visit the Fight site to check out newest articles and all the articles that we've written on combat sports. The Fight site is your one-stop shop for all things combat. And check out ExpressVPN for personal internet protection, which is becoming more and more relevant in the modern day. I don't know why I've said the Fight site before the ExpressVPN thing, but you know, I hope it's evident that it's not a sponsor. I hope you didn't misclick and wasted an entire hour of your time thinking about who the fuck is that guy and what the fuck is he talking about. But if you did, I hope this was entertaining enough and it made you interested in what we are going to produce next. So stay tuned for the follow-up episodes and any articles that me or my colleagues may put out on the topics discussed and the upcoming fights. Yeah, this was a fun one. See ya. Dahin, also tra, verte.